You know, you remind me. There's a couple of things we wouldn't know this. The upcoming Lambeth Conference is going, and I don't know that they figured out exactly what they're going to be doing. Something around climate change. I think it's going to be tree planting, but I'm not. They were still working the details out. A couple of weeks ago, when the primates met, a couple of weeks ago, and it was interesting, the discussion on climate change among the primates, the archbishops, presiding bishops, and moderators from. It sounds like a group of gorillas, but it's actually. Well, yeah, and I know that gang, and so there is a little. But anyway, one of the things that it was really interesting having discussion about climate change mitigation and for example, beef. And cows. And in one of our discussions, there were several bishops from East Africa who were saying cattle, our people have lived off of cattle. We're talking millennium. We're going way back. She said, you got to have an alternative. You can't just, you know what I mean? And it was really interesting because I realized from them the complexity. And they weren't resistant. They weren't resisting, but they were saying it's not as simple as saying switch from. Well, then we got into a joke from cows to chickens. So it was.
As
then that.
Montana.
Yeah, right. And I would think Montana, anywhere
Montana,
where cattle.
Wyoming, the Dakotas.
Yeah. Anywhere. So it takes work and conversation and creativity and time. And I know we don't have a lot of time. I know that's kind of where we are. But the UTO, all of their grants this year, and I think they did $1 million worth of grants around the church, are climate change related. So you can blame, don't just blame don't put my name in it, but put Archbishop of Canterbury, Justin Welby. I'll get it. Yeah. But actually. No, the Church of England has really they're ahead of us in terms of, they last Lent, the Lent before last, they said instead of giving up chocolate, reduce your carbon footprint. And here's how you can do it, and that kind of thing. So they've been, Europe is ahead of us, to be honest. But so you can kind of blame the Church of England. Actually, you can blame the Pope. Actually, we can get it covered. His encyclical, that started it. So it's great.
So one of the things that these guys are doing is, so Montana has a lot of wind and solar power already in the mix. We have a couple of churches that either have or are putting on solar onto the churches. One of the challenges we have that are yoked congregations. So Jamie is the rector at Virginia City, which is one of the oldest, and has the oldest building of the Episcopal Church in Montana. It is in a quote-unquote ghost town, but it is occupied, and they are very much
occupied
by the ghost. By the ghost. You got it right away.
But even though they have lost power into the valley in snowstorms, they will not allow the church to have solar on any part of its property, let alone on the roof.
Because
it doesn't look right.
Historical presence.
Do they have a bathroom?
I'm working on it.
Oh, Virginia City's always had a bathroom. The only
Because
church
of the
that doesn't have a
historical-
bathroom now is Phillipsburg.
Probably
I
gravity
sang at a
feed.
wedding at Virginia City, and there was no bathroom. You went down to the gas station on the corner.
Oh, wow. Okay, yeah, they have a bathroom.
Okay, hang on.
And so that's not part of the deal. You have to live in the 1860s. But everything has to look like the 1860s. But that's our biggest expense in the church is the propane.
Yeah. Oh, yeah.
So, anyway, I'm working on it.
Wow.
I'm working on it with mayor.
Yeah.
Donald.
Well, I've become an evangelist for electric vehicles. In fact, I drove here in one. And if anyone wants a ride, I'll be happy to take you out. It's really hot.
There's one electric vehicle and one, Yours is a
Hybrid.
hybrid.
Ours
right?
is a hybrid, but
Mine's a-
it's a
It's
bold
temporary
and
gas.
we do
Yeah.
electric as much as we can.
And there actually is, they're now putting in a string across at least the southern half, it's not on the High Line yet, but across the southern half, that you can actually drive west to east on an electric vehicle and find places with the high input.
We
So
have,
you
The
don't have to sit there.
supercharger, yeah.
Big Timber has 5 high output chargers, just be noted.
Yeah.
At the gas station that has more square footage
At the gas
dedicated to
station,
guns than it
I
does
know, you know,
to
you
food.
can buy guns, you can buy food, you can buy booze, all in one place.
And by the way, the guns are not behind glass.
Exactly.
You
No.
walk in and
Yeah.
it's like, there's like,
That's right.
the little things that
Yeah.
you would put brooms into, they have 22 stuck in there.
Yeah,
Okay.
It's special.
it is, unique.
Other, what did other groups talk about?
Wow.
Well, we looked at it, you know, your message always is this wonderful message of love and the big picture and how we are called to this vision that God has and so on. And we call that, you know, the macro vision of love that God is trying to get us to and so on. What we combine that with is that is right on as that all is. We live in the micro vision of love. And so it comes with a bit of a struggle along with that is how do we make it real here as we're trying to grab onto that vision there. And I guess that's, we need more discussion on that, I guess.
There was a time when 12-step programs were growing faster than any church in North America. And so I kind of wonder if I shouldn't go back to the big book and look at the 12 steps and see if I can reverse engineer it back to the Oxford stuff and start making that a discipleship program that has 12 steps to it.
Yeah, it would work.
There's a book there.
There is a book.
You're onto something. You really are.
Yeah. I've actually preached on the 12 steps before,
Okay.
because it's actually really good for discipleship and sort of
Yeah.
acknowledging our brokenness and how to
Yeah.
step forward. It is interesting, is when I preached on it, about step 5, I could see certain heads snap.
Yes. Yeah.
And so you can see who probably was in a 12-step program or had a friend or a family member who was. So, but
Well,
it
you know
actually
what they
works really
say?
well.
They say that the people downstairs wish that the people upstairs in the church knew what was actually happening downstairs.
So amen.
Yeah.
That's right.
Well, it takes education.
Same
Years
shoemaker
ago,
as
Terry and
the
I
door.
worked at Catholic
Yes.
Conceal, and they asked us to sing one day at a time. So we did, and we're looking, and the place is awash in tears, and we didn't know what we'd done. It takes education.
Yeah.
I've since been informed. I had a recovering alcoholic live with us for for a year while she was getting her feet on the ground after our kids went to college.
One
And
day
I
at a
went
time.
to a sobriety party, and I didn't know what they were talking about, but it was a major,
One day at a time.
Yeah.
one major
One day.
opening of my eyes.
Jim?
Richard Rohr's book, Breathing Underwater,
Yeah.
is a really good resource for 12 step. And also, when I was serving a church in Portland, Oregon, we had, it was a big church, and we every so often had recovery Eucharists, and that was a wonderful outreach because the various AA groups met in the building and to allow them to participate in the service. And there's actually a resource on the Episcopal Church website of materials that you can do that. It might be a good like evangelism or something to do.
Google search Episcopal Recovery Ministries.
I speak as the grateful spouse of 2 different alcoholics, one of whom was in recovery. Thank you, Lord. I've seen wonderful things happen with the 12 steps. And now in my role as devil's advocate, they're not right for everyone. The 12 steps were written in the 1930s by white men. It's very difficult for a lot of women to begin recovery by saying, I am powerless. Now, as Christians, we understand the gift in that and what it can bring to us. But women are told in our culture, most of their lives, you have no power. So saying, you need something? Come over here, I'll give it to you. By the way, you're powerless. Not really maybe the best way. I endorse that type of model, but I point you to a book called Many Roads, One Journey. I'm sorry, I can't recall the author. But it's another model of starting recovery that also includes, I have the power to change, in other words. So praise the 12 steps, but remember, there are other things. Thank you.
You know, one of the context where there is consistent love enacted is in recovery communities. Because the accountability that is expected, I love you so much that I'm going to hold you accountable. See, that's not mushy, whatever. That's real love. And you see it in recovery communities. In fact, I remember going to, we had NA group, and this is when I was in Baltimore, and so they invited me to come, and so I went, and it was just a normal meeting. And I realized I said, oh, this is street AA. This is like, whoa, this is a polite society. This is like really, because there was like this one dude named Willie, I don't remember. Anyway, Willie had not been invited to somebody's wedding, and apparently everybody else got invited. And like they all headed out right then and there. And finally, the person who got married said, I wasn't inviting you to my wedding because when you're not on your meds, you crazy. And I wasn't going to have you mess up my wedding. And so when Willie said, oh, I understand now, and everybody, thank you for sharing. I mean, it was kind of like real accountability. I mean, and real facing. That's love. That really is. Anyway, this conversation stirred that up. It's there.
One of the threads that we kind of pulled was how the red rag led to the red door.
Oh, yeah. Oh.
Oh, yeah.
I like that.
So
Wow.
do with that what you would.
Yeah,
I wonder if there is.
Yeah.
There might be.
that may be why St. Timothy's had brown doors.
Did they have whatever?
My prior church,
Of course
no
they
more
did.
put a red door on there because it would be tacky.
Oh, that's why?
It would be tacky. So other good discussions.
Somebody spoke.
Somebody back there.
They're back. Well, I have a question. Do you think it's possible that General Convention might add a baptismal affirmation at the end of those renewal of vows that included care for creation? Just a thought.
You know, I've seen the resolution. I don't remember
I
any.
just refer you to the ACC and look at the last one in there.
Anglican Church yeah, no, it's
Which is
which,
increased
yeah,
in good standing.
yeah. You know, I don't know the answer to that. I'm trying to remember if there's anything
thought.
coming.
Just-
I know it's been discussed. It's come up several times, but I haven't heard of any. I don't really know the answer to your question. I know it's interesting because that's what gets discussed as the one missing piece in the covenant.
It'd be nice to have it.
Yeah. I'm going to ask her.
Part of what we took away or wrestled with was that framing of family in Matthew, and thinking about how do we, whether we label it church or not, how do we rebuild family? There are those who have been part of the church and are back. There are those who can't be back yet, and what are we doing in Eucharistic visiting or phone calling or other small group gathering? There are those for whom the church, the building itself, being a place of worship, has not been in their in their framework because they've only joined us on Zoom.
Mhm.
Or they've been out in our courtyard, but never been in the building because that was the safe place to be. And so, how are we moving in community to be family, to be church? And then are our services different besides being hybrid? How are our services different? How are we engaging our people differently to be family as we are church?
Wow.
So is our
Any
table.
ideas?
Yeah.
We go back to, of course, we were heavily influenced by deacons at our table. That's the confession. But that, the basics of community organizing, that deep listening, being with our people, hearing, rather than assuming why Bob isn't back or Betty hasn't joined us or whatever. And again, this is more of a big church, probably maybe a concern than the smaller churches. But to be where they are and go figure that. And while we're there, should we be offering Eucharist, since we are a Eucharistic-based church? And so but how are we moving? How are we gathering stories to then come back? And how does that influence the kind of church we want to be, both out there and in these four walls?
Are there other ideas in the broader?
One of the things that struck me was shared here about just this idea that, you know, we talk about people wanting to go back to what was. But there are a lot of people who want that new wineskin and want to see what happens next. And instead of trying to only take care of the ones who are struggling with the fact that it's not what it used to be, but actually helping them to listen and engage so that we can keep moving. The Spirit's gonna keep moving them. To hold fast to that and not to feel like, you know, we have to wait for this person to finally get it before we can change. We can't do that. We have to keep leading. We have to keep the flock moving because they graze in new places. It's not a static journey. But it takes a lot of teaching, one-on-one, sitting over a cup of coffee, engaging with folks who are very resistant to all kinds of different things, whether it's how we go out from the church or whether it's in worship. So I think it's a prime time to help with the linkages you were talking about in the stories so that they can get the foothold of the tradition, if they will, if you will, but be able to see the movement and the attempts at change. That's a real gift that I heard today.
So Bishop Curry, one of the challenges that we talked about last night was in the parochial report, our favorite thing to fill out.
We all love the parochial report.
Well, you don't have to.
There's a new one coming.
Yeah.
New one coming.
This group here, almost everyone has an online worship presence. And for some of them, they actually have a very large congregation that are Zoom or Facebook Live or YouTube Live only. Some of them are not even, the regular attenders are not even in the United States. And Parochial Report doesn't help them capture that.
Now, does the new one?
No. It says for average Sunday attendance, it was for in-person only.
And so that means our convention delegates are way down in 2
For
years.
next
This
year.
is the one for the pandemic.
Just the
Because
latest one.
for 21,
Yeah.
for 2020,
Oh.
it was,
2020 was fine, but for 2021, they deleted it out. And, and I think the thing is when I saw the form, the message that I heard from the parochial report team was that those who were worshiping only online didn't count.
Yeah.
Yes.
And that's our new church. I mean, because to me, the exciting thing is we have these people that are now bonding with some of these Montana churches, and it's now more of the exciting challenge of how do we feed them?
How do we nurture the parent?
How do we empower them for their ministry? If they haven't been baptized, how do we baptize them? Some things that we can do electronically, but others that are sort of, concrete. So we spent a fair amount of energy on that one.
Yeah.
Other faithful people who would normally be there,
Yeah.
who aren't there because their family or whatever still has risks.
Sure.
And so, they're still there, but they're not showing up, so they're not getting counted. It's just a parochial report is the parochial report, but we would like to do a better job with that.
Yeah. And actually, one of the things, so I was at the cathedral, and this was in early days, just when we were starting to meet, but it was like 4 people in the sanctuary, and then we went downstairs for a Zoom coffee hour, and a couple of Scott's parishioners who were more or less trapped in their assisted living, but a couple of them also had mobility issues, and they hadn't been able to come to church because Montana, our churches are not accessible. They are most of them are made of stone. So trying to get accessibility is a difficult issue. And they were so excited. They had some of their CNAs had come in and helped them figure out how to get on Zoom with their iPads, because of course everybody has iPads or Surfaces. And they were so excited to be able to see each other and have fellowship.
That's so wonderful.
And they all looked at Scott and says, please keep doing this. This is great.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But then again, they don't get recognized.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. No, I do. Where it really matters, they do. But there's a new parochial report. I was trying to think, where's the new convention has to act on it, but there's a completely it's completely redone. Yeah, but I don't think convention has to act on it, and then it becomes the next one. But but I think you read it. But whatever you do, you're doing it. Don't leave. It's remember No Child Left Behind or whatever. No parishioner left behind, and I don't mean people who are already on our books who are on Zoom. I mean the new people we have met in Zoom. Figure out. I'm not sure anybody's got quick solutions. This one, you got to experiment. Try to figure out how do you pastor someone who's in Australia, but they're related to your worshiping community. Well, you can communicate with them, and so that, and maybe keeping that in touch will help. We actually had a young girl. I think she was 13 or 14, and she had been going to church in one of the churches. I've forgotten now which one. Anyway, she wrote me and want to know if she could get a copy of this book, Love is the Way, this one. So my assistant Sharon Jones, they got this. She got the letter, so she emailed it to me because this is during the pandemic. So she emailed, and so I said, well, look, let's get her. So I typed an answer, and she sent the answer back. Well, she was in Australia. So I'm trying to figure out, how do I get this book to Australia? And I said, oh, Amazon. So I go on Amazon, but it's I didn't realize I'm Amazon USA. Amazon Australia or Amazon UK or Amazon wherever. They're all, they're Amazon, but they're different ones. And my account didn't just transfer. Oh, so I had to set up an Amazon Australia, and then because I wasn't really in Australia, then there was, anyway, we finally, 3 months later, she got the book. She did get the book. But that was because of I'm not sure, I've forgotten now there was some relationship between the church she was going to and that book. And I've forgotten now what it was. So there is a pastoral something. I encouraged her to stay in touch with the priest in whatever church it was and all that kind of stuff. And hopefully she did. And then fine, maybe there'll be a little community in Australia. But I don't know the church in Australia. Although I did see the Archbishop of Australia, and I told him about it. I said, look, one of your sheep was grazing in our, I just want you to know. It's like,
so you need alternate Episcopal oversight.
That's right.
Valerie had something.
I just want to thank you and Marty's also said this when you said, we're not just trying to make Episcopalians, we're trying to enlarge the family of God.
Right.
And Marty has mentioned that more than once as well. And I think that's such a much more life-giving way for us to all go about our ministry, because when it feels tribal, it feels small. But when we're connecting with Abraham and all, and everywhere, and being willing to go out of our comfort zones, that has an excitement and an energy, and it's open and it's looking for connection. And so that's one of the things that we talked about and so appreciated, a way of telling the Hebrew scriptures and then Matthew, that we're seeing new, larger connections that bring us out of our small world. Not that Episcopal, I'm a product of Episcopal, went to Episcopal schools, taught at Episcopal schools kind of a thing. So I get that world, but this is really encouraging us to take the charism and the blessing of our tradition and to share it in a bigger way. And that is just awesome good news. So thank you.
Thank you. Yeah. It is good news. And we'll get blessed. Don't worry about that. We'll get blessed. You know what I mean? It's not like we got to hoard the blessing to get blessed. Where'd that come from? No, give it away. Give it away. Yes. Whoever would save his life will lose it. Whoever would lose his life, which is a way of saying, give it away. And I'm not being silly or anything, but whoever would give it, will find it.
It's so interesting. Several years ago, I was doing a hospital visit, because I did a lot of that work. And I've got the collar on. I'm in an elevator going down, and there's this young man standing in the elevator with me. And he's kind of looking, and then he's not looking, and then he's kind of looking. And just about the time we got down to the bottom floor, he said, "Religious, right?"
Oh, yeah.
He hadn't a clue.
No, please.
But he put it together, finally, and I said, "Yep, you're right."
Of a sort.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's out there.
Sure.
We can't assume they have any idea.
However, I was at one of the Thai restaurants during Easter weekend, and I didn't realize an impact I had, because I had my prior youth minister come out for a visit. We were eating lunch, and waitress comes up going, "We don't have your collar on today." Okay.
You gotta behave yourself.
I know.
That's a good point.
That's what the collar helps us do, is it helps us
Yeah.
behave better than we would want to.
Normally.
Yeah.
It's the barbs on the
Did
inside.
you get better service or?
It's a joke collar right away.
And the bishop has a button that she can remotely tighten it.
It's sort of like our wedding rings, for those of us who are married, that why they're a little tight, because it cuts circulation. It is actually time for us to do our lament and covenant. We have done some adjustments. This is something that I want us to do at Clergy Conference and Diocesan Convention. So we did some updates that are particular to our setting. For those who don't remember, the original author is Bishop Dion Johnson, who is not the youngest bishop, but pretty darn close. He's in the neighborhood. He is in the LGBT community, and keep him in prayer, because in the Diocese of Missouri, they elected him, but they're still not quite sure what to do. Those who say, "I love God," and hate their brothers or sisters are liars. For those who do not love a brother or sister whom they have seen cannot love God whom they have not seen. The sins of racism and bigotry disrupt the harmony and oneness that God intends for humanity. Racism and bigotry are dangerous, divisive, and damaging. They purport that some are deserving of dignity over others, and disregards the image and likeness of God found in every human being. We are created in the image of God. Therefore, to engage in racism or bigotry in any form is to refuse to acknowledge the image of God in the other and the stranger. The fact that we were created in the image of God should remind us that each person is a living expression of God that must be respected, preserved, and never dishonored. Amen. Throughout our history, courageous people of God have taken the risk of standing up and speaking out with the least and the lowest. God now challenges us to become courageous people who seek to create sacred communities of hope by dismantling the sin of racism and bigotry. This work involves risking ourselves for the sake of God's love, moving beyond ourselves in order to seek and serve Christ and one another. So together,
as people of faith, we acknowledge our sins and our failure to respect the dignity of every human being. We have individually and corporately fallen short of the glory of God, and now call to mind and name the aspects of our lament. We lament the Church's role in the subjugation, enslavement, and genocide of societies of indigenous peoples, including Native Americans and Pacific Islanders. We lament the Church's role in profiting from the selling, trading, and genocide of people of African descent and the lasting effects of the peculiar trade present with us today. We lament the Church's complicity by silence in the commodification, dehumanization, and belittling of peoples brought to this country to toil in brutal labor, including Latinx people, Asians, Pacific Islanders, and other immigrant and undocumented populations. We lament the Church's complexity in the historical exclusion, internment, and denial of civil rights of Asians and Pacific Islanders. We lament the Church's complicity in failing to honor the language, culture, and civil rights of Latinx people, both American citizens and those from other countries. We lament the places in which we have been spectators and participants in the public and private lynching of people of African or Asian or Native American descent. We lament the Church's lack of moral courage to stand with and on the side of the poor, the marginalized, our LGBTQ+ siblings, and the oppressed. We lament that we do not honor the experiences of others. We lament that we believe we know better than they do. We lament that we do not honor the unique experiences of all persons. We lament the systems of white supremacy, white exceptionalism, and white privileges present in the Church that have condoned people, particularly people of African descent, being viewed as less, inferior, or unworthy, rather than as beloved children of God, made in the image of the divine. We lament the ways in which the stories of people of color have been diminished or erased from the histories of our churches, institutions, and communities of faith. We lament the collusion of the Church with systems that directly and indirectly promote racism, oppression, segregation,
exclusion, and marginalization of those of differing sexuality or gender identity, all while benefiting from their gifts. We lament the willful blindness of Christian leadership in promoting and advocating for systems of over-policing, the militarization of police, mass incarceration, school-to-prison pipelines, poverty, and violence. We lament the resounding silence and the crippling fear that often infects the church in matters of racial reconciliation and social justice. As people of faith, we are called to love the Lord our God with all our heart and with all our soul and with all our mind, and to love our neighbors as ourselves, recognizing the places in which the church and people of faith have fallen short of God's love, particularly in the legacy of racism and white supremacy. We seek to amend our lives to more fully reflect God's dream of beloved community. We covenant to re-examine the history of our communities of faith and institutions to ethical ways, and acknowledge racism and bigoted legacies, and to recognize, remember, and retell the stories of Native Americans, enslaved persons, and other people of color whose labor contributed to white privilege. We covenant to engage our communities of faith, staffs, colleagues, and experts in critical discourse around race, gender, sexuality, and nationality that propels us forward. We covenant to devise and implement standards, policies, and programs that make our commitment to diversity and inclusion a viable reality. We covenant to invest in local businesses that are owned and operated by people of color, indigenous people, LGBTQ plus people, and underrepresented populations. We covenant to listen to and validate the stories, experiences, and feelings of people of color and other minorities as companions along the journey, valuing those experiences as being sacred. We covenant to adopt an intersectional approach in all aspects of our common life, remembering that all forms of oppression are connected. We covenant to financially support the important work of historically Black or Indigenous colleges and universities. We covenant to work towards the dismantling of the school-to-prison pipeline and other systems of institutional oppression. We covenant to stand up and speak out against everyday micro and macro acts of oppression or aggression against LGBTQ+, Indigenous, and people of color. We covenant to struggle and speak out against the denial of civil liberties and voter suppression. We covenant to educate ourselves and share with others the many places where our privilege blinds us from being compassionate to others. We covenant to call out bigotry and hate speech in all aspects of our common life. We covenant to gather with others, including faithful leaders and decision makers at all levels of the church, to ask the hard questions. Does leadership of our institution reflect the diversity of those we serve? Are the many faces of the diverse body of Christ represented in decision-making processes? How are we
Are we inviting and informing leaders? Who is missing around the table? Whose central story do we need to hear? We covenant that in our corporate worship and other activities of our communities, to intentionally cultivate welcome, hospitality, and participation for people of all cultures, ethnicities, sexualities, gender identities, and backgrounds, and to include their rich musical and liturgical offerings in worship. We covenant to invite all members of our faith communities to reflect about and seek better understanding of racism and privilege. We covenant to preach about and pray together for an end to racism, bigotry, and white supremacy, not to bring down heterosexuals, cisgendered people, or people of European descent, but to lift all others up. We covenant to join with local community organizations in working for racial justice and inclusion of all made in the image of God.
And so together,
Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done, on earth as in heaven. Give us today our daily bread. Forgive us our sins, as we forgive those who sin against us. Save us from the time of trial, and deliver us from evil. For the kingdom, the power, and the glory are yours, now and forever.